Boom, 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 boom. Attention mariners and landlubbers, please head to the nearest mustering station. The legal safety briefing is about to begin. Hi, I'm Alison Cusack, also known as The Shipping Lawyer, and I'd like to welcome you aboard to the first ever podcast episode of The Shipping Lawyer. Yes, the marketing team went all out on this one. This is my very first podcast episode, and it is designed to introduce you to myself, Alison, as the host, and also a little bit about what this podcast is going to do and try and achieve. So, as someone who's been in the maritime industry, mostly containerized, for over a decade, I'm incredibly passionate and a certified nerd when it comes to the shipping industry. And more often people say, Alison, I'm new to the industry, I fell into the industry. There is a lot of terminology and jargon and international conventions, and your ships are really, really big. And yes, they're ships, not boats. Boats are our cargo. And a lot of people said, oh, I would love to digest your content or any content on a podcast, on my commute, and just learn a little bit more. As a certified yapper, as the kids would say, I figured, yes, no one asked me, but yes, I will deep dive into shipping law, also known as maritime law, also known as admiralty law, also known as transport law, depending on what area of the world you're in, but also in which way you access it, whether it's road, rail, shipping, or, international law and conventions. So the fun thing about this podcast is I'm going to be interviewing a bunch of cool people. My network is extensive and expansive because I love talking to all my fellow shipping nerds, whether they are marine pilots, whether they are marine surveyors, whether they are Navy captains, also very cool. And I'm also going to be deep diving into all of the framework and scaffolding that exists in the commercial shipping industry, and what was its origin story, how it came about, why it's important, where are we going to next. So as a little bit of a spoiler alert, I'm going to be going into an overview of the conventions, the classic SOLAS, and why the Titanic mattered so much on an international legal scale, which you may not even realize. We'll be talking about things like MARPOL, COLREGs, cargo conventions, our favorite, the Hague Rules, which is coming up onto its 100-year anniversary. We love tradition and convention in our conventions. The US COGSA, very big player, the Hague-Visby Rules, the STR protocol, the magic currency that we created for that purpose. We'll touch a little bit on the Hamburg rules, the Rotterdam rules. What's a bill of lading? Is it a bloke called Bill from an English town called Lading? Or is it a legal document that is sometimes used well and sometimes used for fraud? We'll also talk about that. Who is the IMO? No, it is not the International Monetary Fund, even though everyone hears the O, they think the F. And so we'll be talking about what the IMO does, how it sits with the UN. And then, just for funsies for all of my nerds playing at home, I will be going through the Hague Rules, article by article, sub-article by sub-article. Yes, we will get into the nitty-gritty of the Hague Rules, of US COGSA, of the Hague-Visby Rules, just so that on the very actual occurrence that someone says, hey, what's your favorite article of your favorite convention? You're going to have an answer. And most likely it's going to be the same answer as I have. Article 3, Rule 8 of the Hague-Visby Rules. Yes, absolutely. I do love a sub-article that talks about how you defeat ocean carriers in the line of trade. Who doesn't want to defeat them using their own conventions? Yes. Then we're going to talk about the physics of containers, how they unlocked basically globalization of trade, how they really distorted all the economic powers. We're talking about, the production coming out of India and then China. Then we'll talk about flag state control and port state control. And this is where it gets really, really interesting, because some countries like Australia have very little vessels on their flag. So in terms of a flag state control, they're not power hitters, but in terms of port state control, they are really out there punching above their weight, just banning vessels left, right, and center, and being like, you have a deficiency, you have a deficiency, you have a deficiency, bans for everyone. A little bit hyperbolic, obviously. And then talking about, flags of convenience, flags of responsibility, what it means, who's got the power, and how that influences IMO and regulations. We'll be talking about, who's an owner, who's a charterer, who's a shipper, who's a consignee, why the notified party, doesn't get a lot of power or influence. And then our favourites, seafarers. Who are they? Where do they come from? What's the pipeline? How on earth are we going to have a sustainable amount of, employment? And how are we going to get that pipeline? And then once the seafarers are ready to come to shore, because not everyone can make master, what happens next? How are we, really retaining all of that knowledge and all of that first-hand understanding of the implications of regulations and the implications of, change, and how on earth, there's a real big divide between people who have been on board a physical ship and people who haven't. And, the majority of people haven't been on board a physical ship, whether it's as a seafarer, as a master, as a surveyor, as an inspector, as a lawyer like me, popping on board for a little bit of a tour so I can see just how large a container is and just how large a ship is. And this was like a 4,000 TEU. And yes, I will go into TEUs. And really talking about, how can we as an industry not only create awareness of our industry as a leading employment sector with a variety of opportunities within the subsectors, but also regionally how you can travel the world doing it. But also, what are we doing as an industry to keep those people in the industry once they come ashore, because their knowledge is critical, the improvements to safety are unrivaled. What are we doing about that? So that is kind of, a snapshot of, I went and sat down and I created a list of 80 episodes, because as you do when you're a nerd about something and you're passionate. And so the idea is this is really going to be a resource, to understand what is happening behind the scenes, because shipping is so invisible. Seafarers are even more invisible. Marine pilots at their own conferences are asked by hotel staff if they're airline pilots, which was very funny, but also I felt very bad for them because they'd booked out a whole entire conference and they were like, oh, like airline pilots? And I was like, no, marine pilots. Look out the window. Oh my God. So the goal of this podcast is for shipping practitioners and shipping enthusiasts. And I want to get the love of shipping and the understanding of the legal framework, of the operational reality, of the future goals, of the way that we can really harness knowledge to improve safety, improve economic outcomes, improve the overall experience for everyone participating in the industry or everyone benefiting from the industry. And that is the goal of the Shipping Lawyer podcast. So if you have any suggestions of who you would like to have as a guest on board, who you would like to, topics you would like me to cover, as I said, I've got 80 already down. And so that is the goal of the podcast. So a little bit more about me. I've been on about a dozen podcasts as a guest already, and so I feel like I've told my origin story a million times. But essentially in university, I got into mooting, which is in law school is your fake law courts, and they give you a scenario and you have to, present it as if you're in court and you get judged accordingly. And one of the moots that I did was the IMLAM moot, the International Maritime Arbitration Law moot. And we did a great problem, including safe ports, and I was on the procedural side, and there was too much substantive law, so they gave me a tiny little snippet, which was general average. And everyone who has ever followed me on TikTok, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, or just had any conversation or attended any seminar that I've done, general average does and will come up frequently. One, because I find it endlessly fascinating that a piece of, a legal concept has survived and endured for over 400 years, but also the equitable nature of it endlessly fascinates me as, bringing equity out onto the ship, and there's no playing favorites, and there's no, buying your way out of trouble. Equity rules, and equity saves the day, equity saves the ship, equity saves the maritime adventure. So did my honours thesis on that in law, and I was doing the niche of the niche. Maritime law is a niche, and general average is possibly the nichest subject of maritime law, and globally all the practitioners will agree. And then a little detour into the public sector during the global financial crisis, and then I commenced my legal career at one of the large ocean carriers and got first-hand experience on cargo claims, stevedoring issues, terminal agreements, charter party reviews, vessel incidents, so things catching fire, things breaking down, all the line of trade agreements, how they're set up, how they go wrong. Basically anything to do with containerized shipping I have seen, I have done, I have read about, I have lived in minor fear I will have to deal with it in the future. And then after about 6 years of that, I wanted to keep practicing, and I wanted to switch sides, and I thought cargo interests don't get enough of a they don't have an advocate in the sense who understands enough of the intricacies to overcome the global strong power that ocean carriers have. And so I switched sides to the dark side. If you're from the carrier side, that's how they announced it. And I started my own law firm in 2018. I started my legal career in 2012, and then I started my law practice in 2018. And we've come 6 years now from that. And I've spoken internationally at conventions. I spoke in Geneva. I've spoken on a lot of panels, not only about shipping conventions, food scarcity, line of trade, but also I have spoken a lot about gender equity and gender advocacy, and really talked about how we need to be not only racially inclusive in the shipping industry, which we are. We're very culturally aware when we're dealing with other countries and the people and the cultures and the sensitivities, but also how we can really unlock another 50% of the population to bring them into shipping, because everyone you ever speak to in shipping says, oh, I fell into shipping. And as far as recruitment goes for the industry, that's not a solid plan. That's not a solid long-term plan. So I do a lot of that advocacy, which I think is really, really important, because a rising tide lifts all boats. And if you can speak out on gender, you can speak out on safety. And safety is critical. And if we look at the past, we're in July 2024. If we look at the past couple of months, we've had huge ship fires, we've had bridge collapse, we've had ships run into cranes, into the quayside. If you can speak up on gender, you can speak up on safety. That is 100% my belief. So, so I've got the newsletter on LinkedIn, The Shipping Lawyer. I'm on TikTok as The Shipping Lawyer. I do a lot of fact checking on those viral videos, the North Sea, chant that they had, or the song, and really talk about all those issues. So thank you very much for tuning into the very first episode of The Shipping Lawyer, a podcast, and look forward to engaging with you more. Boom, 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 boom. This concludes the legal safety briefing. Enjoy your day.